Welcome back to State of the Union. While Donald Trump was in court, you may have missed President Biden blanketing the swing state of Pennsylvania this week. But Biden's path in Michigan got more complicated as third-party challenger RFK Jr. qualified for the ballot there, as well as in Hawaii. Here with me now is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who was in Michigan just yesterday campaigning for President Biden. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's start with that RFK Jr. news that he will officially be on the presidential ballot in Michigan this fall. A new poll shows him getting 9% among Michigan voters, and he's polling 20% with independents. That's, of course, a state that Joe Biden won by just 3 points in 2020. Does Kennedy being on the ballot there pose a real threat to Joe Biden's reelection?
Well, good morning, Dana. And I was in Michigan yesterday, and the enthusiasm level among Democrats in Michigan is very high. I was in even a Republican county meeting with the Democratic leadership there, and we had a huge crowd. People really are knocking on doors, talking to people about what's important in this election. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being on the ballot in Michigan, I think, is going to have little effect on the ultimate result. People understand that there are really only two candidates that have a path to victory in this country and in Michigan. And, of course, that's Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And the challenge for people is, you're looking at two very different sets of values. And I think people understand that it's Joe Biden that stands for American values, the values of standing up for your neighbors and your community, of standing up for working families and women's rights. And the contrast is huge between those two candidates, where Donald Trump wants to take away people's right to get an abortion if they want to, wants to take away people's workers' rights, and wants to lower people's wages, and indeed is the one who sent jobs overseas, while Joe Biden is the one who's brought American jobs back to this country.
But, Governor, you're talking about this as if it's a binary choice, and the whole point in Michigan, and perhaps as we see the other states decide who's going to be on the ballot, other swing states, it's not a binary choice. And RFK Jr. does provide a third way for people who just don't like what Joe Biden, or even Donald Trump for that matter, but in this particular case, it's Joe Biden I'm asking about, don't like what he's selling.
I'm not suggesting there aren't other names on the ballot. I'm suggesting simply that when people go to the ballot box in November, they're going to see that there are really only two choices, because it's throwing away your vote if you're a Democrat and you vote for someone else on the ballot other than Joe Biden. And I believe that people will see that contrast of values that I'm talking about and understand that they've got to vote for Joe Biden if they want to make sure that the United States does not fall into the hands of someone who is, frankly, a sociopath, has been indicted 91 times, and is someone who would take this country backward.
The Democratic convention is in your hometown of Chicago just 4 months from now. The divisions in your party over Gaza and other issues are really raw. And just this week, pro-Palestinian protesters blocked the highway to O'Hare Airport. We saw similar protests in San Francisco and New York. How worried are you that 2024 Chicago, that convention, could look a lot like the infamous 1968 one, which of course overshadowed what happened inside?
Well, again, let's start with the stark contrast that people are going to be faced with, and just understand that Joe Biden is fighting for a peace in the Middle East, is fighting to end the hostilities between Israel and Gaza, and make sure that we're providing humanitarian aid there. You can imagine the complexities that are faced by this administration in the Middle East, with one of our most difficult enemies in Iran firing missiles at Israel, and with the challenges that Russia is posing in the Middle East as well. So when you think about the protests, it's Joe Biden that's standing for peace, and a lasting peace at that. And it's the Republicans that, frankly, would stoke the flames of war in the Middle East. So we did see a protest at O'Hare this week, but I think you should notice that protesters were out and about across the country. And it was in Chicago where they ended that protest soonest. Our Chicago Police Department was able to get those folks off the highway faster than any other city in the United States, and they're prepared for the Democratic convention. Look, we believe in free speech, and we're going to allow people to protest and, say whatever it is they want to say. But the reality is we're also going to make sure that people have ingress and egress and that they're safe in our state. I want to add one thing. 1996 was also a year of a Chicago convention, and it was a terrific convention. It's one of the best conventions, and I've been to every one since I was able to vote. It was one of the best conventions in my lifetime. So I think we're going to see something more like that. And of course, we in the Democratic Party, we support people's right to protest and have their voices heard.
Governor, I want to ask about the issue of abortion. You were at a meeting with Vice President Harris earlier this year where you and other governors urged the Biden campaign to focus more aggressively on abortion rights. Is President Biden specifically being aggressive enough on the issue? Do you want him to go even further?
Well, he's talking about it virtually everywhere he goes. Again, Joe Biden is the one that's going to preserve a woman's right to choose. It was Donald Trump that took that right away from more than half of women across the United States. So it's the Democratic Party, it's the pro-choice president of the United States that's going to stop the ban that the MAGA Republicans want to put on women's reproductive rights. And he's the one who's going to restore rights to people across the United States. That freedom is hugely important. It's the Republicans that are trying to take away your right to IVF, that are trying to take away your right to contraception, your right to an abortion. It's Democrats that are standing up for those rights. And I think, again, that contrast is clear to people.
I want to ask a very different strategy question when it comes to the Biden campaign. We, of course, have seen the split screen that we're going to continue to see. President Biden campaigning, former President Trump in court. Biden is deliberately avoiding talking about Trump's legal issues on the trail because he doesn't want to play into the claims that he's orchestrating the political prosecution, which of course I should say again that there's no evidence of. But just as a political strategic matter, do you think ignoring it is a mistake? Or should Biden be reminding voters at every turn that the Republican nominee is currently involved in a criminal trial? He's the defendant.
Well, when your opponent is dropping in the polls, when your opponent is creating challenges for himself, you don't want to get in the way of that. So I actually think that the president is handling it perfectly. He is talking about Trump. He's just talking about all of the other things about Donald Trump. People aren't going to want him to be president of the United States for the next 4 years, because they saw what he did during the 4 years when he was president. And it's, again, Joe Biden's the one who's created millions and millions of jobs. We lost jobs under Trump. I think those are the kinds of contrasts that Joe Biden ought to be talking about. And let's let the courts have their say about Donald Trump's crimes. And I don't think that Joe Biden needs to be talking about that when he can remind people about what's at stake for their future when they go into the ballot box in November.
Before I let you go, a lot of talk already about whether there'll be a debate between the president and the former president. Would you encourage Joe Biden to debate Donald Trump?
Look, I think we're used to having debates. There's no doubt. I will say that whenever I look at Donald Trump's debating style, he lies and lies and lies. And it's so hard to respond to that in the middle of a debate. You only have 30 seconds or 60 seconds to respond. Do you talk about what you want to do for the future, or do you respond to the lies that have come out of Donald Trump's mouth every minute? And so I'm concerned about that, just to be honest with you. But I also think that Joe Biden is a terrific debater. He understands the issues. Donald Trump doesn't read, doesn't understand any of these issues. And so he'll just prevaricate the entire time while Joe Biden is actually showing people a great future for the United States.
Governor Pritzker of Illinois, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana.